welcome to a new episode of Expert Insights. And today we have the privilege of hosting Ms. Gayani Abeyasinghe, Head of FemTech at MAS Holdings. Gayani, let's start with what is FemTech?
Sure. So I think first of all, thank you for talking to me about this. It's good to have more people talking about FemTech in general. So FemTech is essentially the use of technology, and that technology can be digital, it can be clothing, to address women's health needs. So it can range from apps to track your periods, fertility tracking. In the case of MAS, we're an apparel company, so it's about coming up with better clothing for women, whether it's periods, pregnancy, or the menopause.
Okay. And what sort of role is it? Are you mainly based on the Sri Lankan consumer, or are you based on a consumer outside Sri Lanka? How does it work?
So we've been on this journey for about 5 years now, and we've actually looked at ourselves not just as a Sri Lankan company, but as a global company. So we've been looking at it in an international scale. Our first product, which is for incontinence, is primarily US-based as a brand. The second area that we looked at was the menopause, and that's primarily based in the UK. We are looking at the Sri Lankan market as well to understand kind of what the actual needs are before we decide what makes more sense for the Sri Lankan consumer. But it's important for us that we look at it as MAS not just being a Sri Lankan company.
And what sort of innovation drives that? What have you had to do from a company's perspective to catalyze the sort of innovation that is needed to be able to cater to that sort of market?
Sure. So I think the most important thing is that MAS is known as an apparel manufacturer with really strong B2B customer relationships. In order to be successful in FemTech, it's been important for us to really understand the end consumer needs. So actually the process that we use for innovating in FemTech and in MAS is actually understanding. So if you're talking about periods, talking to women that are having issues with their periods, or if it's a menopause, actually talking to the end consumer and understanding it's really the unlock of what is their end need and being able to solve for that has been the unlock. And then that's using what MAS is capable of in terms of the clothing that we have access to come up with a solution for the particular need that consumer has.
And does this innovation happen in Sri Lanka? Is this Sri Lanka inspired innovation? And is the kind of the human capital coming from Sri Lanka as well, or is it mainly foreign based?
Primarily Sri Lankan driven, which is what we're most proud of as well. So our team essentially sits in Sri Lanka. We understand the consumer need in foreign markets as well, based out of here, and we're in market where it's necessary. But the team is fundamentally based here. Where we find that there's a need that we can't solve within the company, we do use an open innovation process to try and identify partners outside that can help us. Okay. But by and large, we sit here as a Sri Lankan team.
I mean, there's a big criticism of kind of Sri Lankan companies in general that kind of they face these barriers that don't allow them to innovate. They face these barriers that kind of don't allow them to go into new markets and so on. How has MAS succeeded in that sense?
I think first and foremost in terms of hiring the right people. So our talent is really important to us, whether it's graduates from local universities that we've hired, or Sri Lankans and foreigners who studied abroad that have come back to Sri Lanka as well. So we've tapped into a very diverse talent pool in order to be able to solve these solutions. And then the second part of it is, I think, not restricting ourselves to being here. Having access to technology means that you can keep tabs on what's happening in other parts of the world even if you're here. So yes, there are barriers, but there are also ways to, if you're creative enough, you can also figure out ways to innovate around those barriers.
What sort of barriers do you face?
I think going back to the same point, I think if you are based in Sri Lanka and trying to solve for a consumer outside, it can be difficult to try and understand, what is the actual pain point? How much will this consumer that's sitting in New York pay for this product? We are not in Sri Lanka. I think online buying and selling is, it's getting there, but we're not to the same level as, a consumer in the US, who's very comfortable with Amazon Prime and getting all of that. So I think being in Sri Lanka and trying to get into the mindset of a consumer that we're not a part of the ecosystem can be tough, and it's about figuring out how to get away from that.
In terms of tapping into a labor force, are there any issues with kind of education or kind of the skills gaps that you face?
I think, the education in Sri Lanka, the education system, in any case, we think there's definitely rooms in which it can be improved to make it more innovative. I think there's a tendency for the local education system to sometimes teach more along the lines of memorization and then regurgitating those facts for an exam, as opposed to, we do think it's more important to have, the thinking and the logic and the analytical skills being built into children in school, because then you're actually able to solve problems rather than do that. So I think that's going to change. I think another thing is that being in part of an innovation team, we hire a large amount of engineers and technology specialists, and there tends to be, there isn't a gender balance there. So I think it is important to encourage more girls to get into STEM, and then therefore be having more engineering graduates that are female as well.
Is MAS doing anything in that regard to get more women in STEM?
I think as a private sector company, we are doing more we can in terms of we are engaged with the universities, and we try and get our employees out to the universities to talk about the importance of having women in technology, and also by showcasing our employees that are female engineers that have done really well at MAS. But I think that perhaps we actually need to, as a company and as a country, start out earlier, because a lot of those decisions around what you study in university are actually taken in school. So we need to engage school children earlier on in the process.
Right. Finally, Gayani, if we were to look at what our future were to hold, what do we need to focus as a country? Maybe in terms of policy or kind of structurally as well, but what do we need to kind of focus on?
Sure, I think it's the same question as before. I think it's education. I think there are shorter-term policies, relatively short-term policies perhaps in terms of how we look at the finance and the human capital side of the country, but I think fundamentally if the education system isn't changed to be more of an open education system, you're going to kind of keep on having people coming out of the system that have gone through kind of a very mechanical way. And so I think the education system needs to be looked at if you want to have people that are able to kind of innovate for the future coming through.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, Gayani.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Expert Insights. Do join us next time. Thank you.